I'm Guy Mangiamele, Director of AMCI Testing, and this is the Tesla Model 3, the car that's bringing many questions about the future of vehicles and vehicle technology into focus. The two big questions. Can Tesla really correct an important braking issue with just an over-the-air update? And two, is Model 3's braking performance now better than any remotely comparable car? Now, I'll admit we can be a fairly skeptical bunch, but after 30 years of brake testing, we just had to test this for ourselves. We decided to investigate on our own because the answers to these questions seem so pertinent in this new era of vehicle safety, and with the changing relationship between vehicle physics and software. Before we take you through our final results, we should probably tell you why we test at this level of detail and why our data is so reliable. It's because, primarily, our clients want the accurate truth about where their product stands in segment. Repeatable, legally defensible accuracy is the basis of our business. So let me introduce you to two other members of the AMCI testing team. Gary Thomason, our lead test driver, and George Doganis, manager of testing operations, both multi-time national SCCA championship winners. There's nobody better to guide us through our findings on Model 3 and how its braking compares to similar-sized sedans. So guys, when you first read about the braking variability on Model 3 and saw the delta in results that some of the magazines were getting, what were your first thoughts on it?
We thought it's something that's unusual. Something unusual is going on. Mm-hmm. In our experiences, doing this for decades, we don't see variabilities more than 10 feet without a reason. So that spiked our interest.
5 feet would be more a normal variation between runs. The magazines, some of the magazines were seeing higher than that. And Consumer Reports had a car that made one good stop and then suddenly wouldn't do it again, including after sitting overnight. And that's what really piqued my interest. It's like, how can that be? Something's changed in the car. So the pads have changed, or the software has changed. One of the two. No other explanation.
And so, what was your best guess? Just from the outside, what would you think if this would have been 5 years ago? What would have been your best guess that was causing it? Maybe wrong pads, or?
Well, yeah. So pad material is a very long, complex subject. In racing, we're used to selecting pads for whatever type of racing that we're doing. So so we have experience with that. But street cars is factory production cars is a completely different subject, and they have to pick a balance, something that's going to work in every scenario that a street car might be subjected to. And racing is not really one of them. Certainly for this type of car. Had Tesla selected a pad that maybe was inappropriate? Did they put the wrong pad on that car that suddenly degraded after one stop and wouldn't come back? That can happen with certain pads in racing. If you abuse them or do the wrong thing or break them in wrong or something are very unusual.
So maybe it could have been something that came down to the protocol that they were using in testing. Maybe the way they bedded the brakes in or didn't, or something, right? Could cause that as well.
Brake bedding is critical. If you're going to do brake testing, there is variability, and the only way to protect yourself against that is to have a very thorough bedding process. And we do have one, a proprietary process, and without that you cannot transfer material from the pad to the surface of the rotor well enough to where you have consistent braking run after run. Mm-hmm. So a good bedding process is key.
And it's not just consistency. It's going to break better once they've been burnished or broken in. Now different pads vary on what they want and what they need to do that. So some work right away, really don't need much break-in. And then the opposite extreme is it's going to stop at 270 feet, from 70 miles an hour anyway, if it's not burnished properly and broken in. So pads are something you have to have your ducks in a row, get it right. So that's why that came up as a possible explanation of what was going on.
Because I thought it was interesting that, for instance, in the Car and Driver write-up, they had this incredible variability between stops, yet they didn't call it fade. So it was pretty clear that their editors thought, well, there's something going on here that's not fade, doesn't feel like fade.
Yeah, fade is. I didn't see fade mentioned by Consumer Reports or any of the magazines, and fade is a different thing. That's where the heat has gotten too high, and the pedal starts to get soft, and you get long travel, and the distances start to increase, and you have to apply more force to try to keep the distances where they are. Clearly, it's overheating, and your cooling procedure between runs needs to change, to cool that brake system off more. So, and again, that didn't come up in. I didn't see the word fade used.
And what about other possibilities in terms of testing protocol? The way we test compared to the way most magazines test, that we thought might be able to give us a more secure result, a more accurate result.
Because we know there's variability, we spend a lot of time making sure that everything's correct. For instance, our braking surface is cleaned up before we start testing, and so from the first run, the surface is seeded. We don't report the best stopping distance we got. We report the average, and we pay attention to the range from run to run to see if the range is too big, so we can see if there's something going on. Of course, we spoke about the brake bedding procedure. The other thing we do, especially in this case, we tested on two different surfaces. We tested both on concrete, because some freeways, like in Southern California, are concrete, and in other states, we also tested on asphalt. So we could have results on both surfaces.
And it has an impact, right?
It does. It did have an impact. And we do all of these things because the programming a manufacturer does in getting the ABS tuning, the anti-lock braking system tuning correct, has a lot to do with the way the car stops, and the way the car recognizes the surface it's on and then takes the appropriate actions to produce the best results.
What about the precision of the instrumentation that we use? Anything interesting in that?
Well, we use multiple systems. In this case, we used two different systems. We used a GPS-based system, but we also used an even more accurate optical system that basically has a much better resolution than the GPS-based system. So we used both in order to see if there's anything that could be attributed to equipment or not.
Yeah, one of the advantages of the optical system is that, and this is an important point, is we measure braking with a switch on the brake pedal. So we're capturing that delay. There's a small delay between applying the pedal and actual braking occurring, and that delay can vary from vehicle to vehicle. It doesn't normally vary a lot, but that's part of the distance. You're traveling. Our test is 70 to 0. We did both 60 and 70 in this particular exercise, but either way, you're traveling, quite a distance. So even a small delay adds to that distance, and plus the car doesn't reach its full braking capability until a further delay has happened, and that varies actually a fair amount because the ABS system has to initiate itself and decide what's going on and what kind of grip's on this surface and settle down, and that varies from car to car, and so you want that process captured. And the magazines in general, not all of them, but in general, are not doing that. They're starting their run at 75, and they start braking at 75, and then they trigger the equipment at the target speed, so 70. So it's always going to be very close to 70. But they've missed all those delays that are inherent in different systems on different cars.
And a part of what you really should measure,
Absolutely.
because that's a part of the whole braking process, right?
Absolutely.
So it's important to note that we did use a switch in this, and that captures all those delays. When we were curious about that, because different cars do behave differently. Also, there's because of that initial variability, the way the brake is applied matters. So and we do a best effort technique. So that doesn't really matter with most ABS systems, except in the initial application. That you can find cars that are sensitive to different application methods.
It has to do with the way the car transfers weight to the front and how the front shock absorbers react to that almost violent transition of weight.
And so cars would prefer a softer application because of various things that can happen, like running into the bump stops in the front suspension. If that happens, it's definitely going to make a longer run. So there is some technique to it.
And so when you read about Tesla's claim that they were going to fix this through an over-the-air update, which would lead one to believe that it has something to do with the interplay between perhaps the ABS system or some other programming of the electronic brake system from the pedal to, I mean, did that seem like a plausible fix?
The only explanation for an over-the-air update being able to fix that, and apparently it did, return that car back to its original braking numbers, is there was a software problem as opposed to a hardware problem. So that kind of narrowed things down quite a bit. So that means that Tesla had made some decisions about how the software is going to react to this sort of testing, and that they were going to fix that. So the talk was about ABS algorithms, but that's kind of a fuzzy phrase. But what about not recovering? I mean, the ABS algorithm is going to decide how quickly the ABS is cycling and how it reacts to different surfaces and so forth, and different pedal pressures maybe. But why? Was there a switch? Was there a switch maybe in the software that said, we don't like what you're doing, and we're not going to let you do it anymore, and I'm going to remain in this reduced function mode, similar to launch control in certain cars.
Yeah.
So that was the question.
Since we brought the word of mechanical into this play, well, we have an electric car. So the other issue came up, the issue of regeneration.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. So did the regenerative braking have something to do with this? Is the car using any regenerative braking during emergency stops or not? So that was the other question we wanted an answer to.
So how did we look at that?
Day one was the car had a normal state of charge, the Tesla 3. It was about 50% charged. So we wanted to see what would happen when the car has plenty of room for regenerative braking to come into play. Day two was when we charged the Tesla 3 completely. The first run that we did was right after being fully charged. And then we also wanted to see what the effect is from one day to the next of a cooling period for the brake hardware.
Overnight cooling, So two significant changes, and the big deal being full charge. That's a big deal.
And we have the ability to do that because we can charge it right here at our test facility, pull out, and just start 70 to 0 braking.
That's what we were curious about. Where does this regenerative braking energy go if the battery's completely charged, and is it reduced? Well, the answer is yes, it's reduced. It even tells you it's reduced. So the answer we were looking for, does that affect the braking distance? Because regenerative braking is limited. So how does that affect the distances? And the answer was it didn't.
It didn't.
It did not.
Okay.
In fact, some of our best stops were, I think our single best stop was the very first run with a completely topped battery. So, and again, the differences weren't large, but it clearly has, the mechanical system is perfectly capable of stopping that car without any help from the regenerative system, at least as far as braking distances.
And we actually tested the regenerative braking for the first few runs after the car was fully charged, and you could see that the first run, the regenerative braking was only capable of producing 0.02 G, and then it went to 0.04 on the next run, 0.06, and then it climbed up. But
so as there was headroom in the battery to take that, it was using more regeneration.
So, absolutely. And going back to the mechanical issues or possibility, we were very curious about the pad material. As we alluded to before, pads have a lot to do with the braking performance of a car, or possibly fade. So we actually measured the brake pad thickness before we started the testing, and then we measured it at various points during the testing. And the surprise was that the wear was completely normal, because we had a separate car, let's say not a control car, but we had another car that we tested at the same time to see if we notice anything unusual. And the brake pad wear was very similar between the two cars.
So basically what we did was, because when we test brakes or test anything, you really need to have a control. You need to have at least one other vehicle against which you're comparing the results, right? So we did have, we obtained a brand new Toyota Camry as another similar sized vehicle in segment basically, and we conducted tests against both the Model 3 and the Camry at the same time.
That's right.
So can you give us a little window into kind of what those comparative results were? And you've talked about already, when we measured the brake pad wear on both of those cars, and both where the pads were at the beginning of the test and at the end, right? So it would kind of walk us through some.
You know, we did quite a few stops, and we measured the wear to being about 0.003 of an inch of pad material that got used up in the process, and it was similar in both cars.
Yeah, that's the important part.
That's
is
important.
that the two cars were very similar.
Right.
There had been some reports that the Tesla Model 3's pads wear quickly, especially when on a track, for instance. And
Right.
So we were curious as to the softness of that factory pad. And there, between the Camry and the Tesla, it was insignificant difference.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Another interesting point was that the pads on the Tesla were actually made by Brembo, as we saw, which was an interesting point for the enthusiasts in this. But going back to some Camry points, Camry was a model of consistency. It stopped very well from the first stop to the end. Actually, even when we compared the stops between concrete and asphalt, they were within a foot. It never varied. And we tested it 2 days. Again, it was right on. The braking stops were the same, whether day 1 or day 2. There was variation of 1 foot.
And so what was the actual difference between the two cars, if we consider them to be sort of same size sedans?
Yeah. Well, should we start at the beginning?
Sure. Start at the beginning.
Gary, want to take that one?
Well, on day 1, and again, these cars have been burnished through our proprietary burnishing procedure, which is a significant time-consuming procedure. At any rate, the Camry was slightly better than the Tesla. Again, this was from 70 miles an hour, and we're talking about a 7-foot difference between the two, with the Camry being 7 feet better, which is not an enormous difference. And was the Tesla in a range that's acceptable for that category of car? Yeah, absolutely. The Camry is actually quite good for that segment. And it is an XSE. But they are, comparable tires on the two cars actually, because the tread wear rating, for instance, on the Camry was actually higher than what's on the Tesla. So it's not like it's a performance tire on the Camry. That's not true. And then we also did concrete. The Tesla seemed to prefer the concrete and came down in distance by 4 feet again from what it did on the asphalt. And it closed up on the Camry. The Camry came down as well, but barely, insignificantly actually. So it was very, very similar on asphalt and concrete, where the Tesla came down a good 4 feet. So then you're getting into the pretty good for that category stopping distances. And we also did 60-0 on the asphalt surface, just to compare with what the figures we had seen from Consumer Reports, for instance, and what Tesla was claiming. And Consumer Reports, I think, at 135, and we were at 130 as an average on asphalt for the Tesla. So again, and that's including this capturing the delay, so that's important.
And what was the Camry in that same?
The Camry was better. The Camry was 126 feet average on asphalt from 60. So again, a little better. Is that a huge difference? No. Again, both cars performed quite well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
And then we moved to the second day of testing, and here's the interesting part. As we said, the Camry stayed exactly where it was, no variation. The Tesla on the asphalt surface and on the concrete, it did improve some more. Which was
After cooling overnight.
Yeah. It improved by about another 3 feet on both surfaces. So it's asphalt stop came down to 170 feet, within 3 feet of the Camry, 3-4 feet of the Camry. But
So close that gap.
Close that gap quite a bit. And also on concrete, it came down to 166 feet, which is a tie with the Camry on that. So it was interesting to see that there was actually, where the Camry did not perform any differently from one surface to the other, the Tesla 3 improved, or it seemed to stop better on concrete. And
that could be software. It could be tires. We don't know. So it clearly showed a preference for the concrete where the Camry didn't care. So is that a problem? No, that's not a problem. But it's interesting to talk about.
Fascinating results.
Yep, absolutely.
What we can say is that without any physical changes to the car's braking system, Model 3's braking variability issue has been resolved. In short, braking performance is no reason to steer clear of Model 3. But on the other side of the coin, a less expensive Toyota Camry will outbrake it, if by an insignificant margin. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for continuing discussion on automotive technology, where it's going, and how to test it. See you next time.